My heart aches, Lord, as I replay the scene in my mind, a chilling tableau of quiet dignity meeting unyielding prejudice. It was a morning like any other, the promise of a new day unfolding, as Judge Raymond Carter, a man steeped in justice and fair-mindedness, guided his black Lincoln Continental into a highway rest area. He was dressed for purpose, for service. A slate-gray suit, a light blue dress shirt, documents for a gubernatorial meeting neatly tucked away. For 2 decades, Raymond had poured his life into the scales of justice, a beacon of fairness in the district court. Yet, in the blink of an eye, the weight of those years, the honor of his calling, all dissolved under the harsh, unseeing gaze of a patrol car's flashing lights. Officer Jeffers, from within his cruiser, narrowed his eyes, a calculating, cold suspicion already forming. A black man, alone, in a nice car at a rest stop. In that twisted perception it was reason enough. A quick radio call to his partner, Officer Riek, and then, without a shred of patience for backup, Jeffers was out, approaching the Lincoln. Raymond, sensing the shift in the air, the sudden chill of an unspoken accusation, lowered his window. His hands, visible on the steering wheel, were a silent testament to compliance, a practiced gesture of self-preservation in a world that often judged him before he spoke. "Good morning, officer," he offered, his voice calm, measured. "Is everything all right?" But civility found no purchase. Jeffers' response was clipped, flat, a verbal brick wall. "We got a report of a stolen vehicle matching this description seen leaving a gas station nearby." Raymond blinked, not in fear, but in pure bewilderment. He calmly offered his registration, a simple, logical step to clear the air. Yet, instead of accepting, Jeffers retreated a step, his hand already on his holstered weapon. The air crackled with a shift in power. "Step out of the vehicle now," he barked, the thin veil of politeness shredded, replaced by raw assumption and a chilling authority. Raymond's eyes narrowed slightly. He craved no trouble, understood the futility of roadside argument. Slowly, deliberately, he opened the door and stepped out, his 6-foot frame composed, a quiet fortress of self-control. By the time Officer Riek arrived, the situation had already spiraled, propelled by an invisible force of bias. Jeffers had Raymond standing, hands raised, at the rear of his own car, while Riek, uncertain yet silent, simply watched. "I'd like to know what I'm being accused of," Raymond stated, his voice still measured, but with a new, quiet firmness, an echo of the judge he was. "I haven't done anything wrong." But no answer came. Instead, Jeffers walked around to Raymond's car door, reached inside without permission, and began rummaging through the glove compartment. It was an invasion, a violation, and Raymond took a small, deliberate step forward. "Officer, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle," he stated, clearly, unequivocally. It was a declaration of his rights, a simple assertion of legal truth. But in Jeffers' mind, it was all he needed. "That's obstruction," he snapped, malice now undisguised. "You're interfering with an investigation." Before Raymond could utter another word, Jeffers grabbed his arm, twisted it violently behind his back, and the cold metal of a handcuff snapped shut. Riek hesitated, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes, but a nod from Jeffers sealed her complicity, and the other wrist was secured. Raymond didn't resist. His voice, though quiet, was even, cutting through the strained silence between them. "You're making a serious mistake." The agonizing scene unfolded before a handful of travelers, their coffee cups forgotten, their stretches abandoned. A young college student, a digital witness of unfolding injustice, had already pulled out her phone, recording from across the lot, her raw, disbelief-laced voice whispering, "This is insane, he didn't do anything." A retired veteran shook his head slowly, the wisdom of years etched on his face, muttering, "That man doesn't look like someone who stole anything." Jeffers and Riek, locked in their narrow focus, saw nothing but the dangerous suspect they believed they had cornered. Yet, Raymond walked with a profound, almost defiant dignity, even with his hands bound behind his back. His head remained held high, not in arrogance, but in the quiet, heartbreaking disbelief that decades of service, of honors, of legal expertise, could vanish in an instant, reduced to a mere profile, a baseless, cruel presumption. As he sat in the back seat of that police car, the world blurred past the window. Parking lot, trees, the indifferent sky. He was not angry yet, Lord. Not in that initial, shock-laden moment. He was calculating, thinking, planning. He knew something the officers did not. This would not end the way they thought. No, Lord, this cruel public humiliation was merely the bitter seed of a profound, necessary reckoning. My soul aches, Lord, as I follow Judge Raymond Carter into the cold, indifferent heart of the state police precinct. The shift from the open road to this enclosed, sterile space felt like a sudden, suffocating descent. He sat in a hard plastic chair, every rigid line of it a mockery of comfort, mirroring the unyielding situation. The handcuffs were gone, yet their legacy remained etched on his wrists. Angry red marks, vivid testimonials to the arbitrary power that had just been wielded. The booking officer, a figure of detached routine, barely glanced at his ID, simply typing in the information. To them, Lord Raymond was just another entry, another statistic, another black man brought in under suspicion. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't arguing, and in their eyes, this quiet composure only deepened their suspicion. They mistook his discipline for guilt, his calm dignity for cunning, utterly blind to the profound strength of a man who understood justice from both sides of the bench. Officer Jeffers, the architect of this escalating injustice, paraded past the holding area more than once, each time his eyes flickering with thinly veiled irritation, a silent taunt. Officer Riek, meanwhile, hovered in the background, a ghost of discomfort in her posture, yet her lips remained sealed, a chilling testament to quiet complicity. Raymond had been held for nearly 2 hours, Lord. 2 agonizing hours with no phone call, no explanation, just the oppressive weight of waiting, a suffocating silence where answers should have been. 3 times he had asked, calmly, respectfully, to contact his office, to explain his vital meeting in Lansing. Each request was met with a dismissive wave or a deafening silence. Around him, the precinct hummed with low, careless conversations, the relentless clicking of keyboards, the jarring bursts of radio static. Other officers drifted in and out, their gazes sliding over Raymond with idle curiosity, never truly engaging, never acknowledging his humanity. Some even allowed themselves a smirk. They noticed his tailored slacks, his polished shoes, the unmistakable posture of a man of substance. But this, instead of granting him respect, only made him a greater curiosity, a challenge to their prejudiced worldview. One officer, in a low, sneering tone, muttered, "Thinks he's special." Raymond heard it, felt the sting of it, yet he did not flinch. His stillness was a shield. Finally, Jeffers stepped back into the holding area, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his voice laced with mocking inquiry. "So, you going to tell us why you were sitting there with your engine running? You casing the area, waiting for someone?" Raymond looked up, his voice steady, a calm island in a sea of hostility. "I was reviewing directions on my phone. I had a meeting in Lansing. That's all." Jeffers scoffed, dripping with contempt. "You people always got a story." Riek, still standing silently behind him, shifted uncomfortably, but she said nothing. Raymond didn't respond. He knew the pattern, Lord. They were waiting for him to snap, to give them a reason, any reason, to escalate this manufactured drama. But he would not give it to them. He had spent, after what must have felt like an eternity, a new presence entered the swirling chaos of the precinct. Sergeant Pamela Yates, a woman in her early 50s with graying hair neatly tucked into a bun, possessed sharp eyes that missed little. She stopped, her gaze settling on Raymond, a silent question in her posture. "How long's he been here?" she asked, her voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. "Almost 2 hours," someone answered from a nearby desk, adding the dismissive charges. "Obstruction and vehicle match." Yates frowned. There was something in Raymond's stillness, his quiet dignity, that struck her. "Sir, have you been advised of your rights?" she asked, her tone measured. Raymond nodded once. "Yes, ma'am, but I've not been permitted to call my office. I've asked multiple times." She looked at him more carefully now, her sharp eyes taking in the composure, the clear, precise tone that spoke not of defiance, but of deep self-possession. "What's your name again?" she inquired. "Raymond Carter," he stated, his voice calm yet carrying an undeniable weight. "And I strongly recommend someone checks that name before this mistake gets bigger." From behind her, Jeffers chuckled, a sneering sound of dismissiveness. "He's been pulling that important man act since we brought him in." Yates shot him a look that silenced him instantly. "That's enough." Then she turned back to Raymond, her expression thoughtful. "Let me see what we've got." She walked to the nearest terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. It would only take a few minutes, but Raymond, in his profound wisdom, already knew what she'd find. For now, he simply sat back, silent once again, waiting for the inevitable moment the entire room would shift. It was coming. He could feel it, a subtle tremor in the very air of the precinct. Sergeant Pamela Yates stared at the screen, a digital tapestry revealing a truth that shattered the precinct's casual indifference. At first, she scanned it casually, expecting the routine, a clean background, perhaps a couple of minor traffic tickets. But the moment Raymond Carter's name fully loaded into the system, her brows furrowed in disbelief. A long, distinguished list of credentials bloomed across the screen. Academic honors, prestigious legal appointments, judicial certifications. And then the full, undeniable truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. Honorable Raymond L. Carter, Presiding Judge, 14th District Court, State of Michigan. Her eyes widened slightly, absorbing the impossible reality. She double-checked the photo on file. It matched perfectly, the man sitting quietly, patiently in the holding area. She looked back over her shoulder at him through the glass, then back at the screen, blinking once as the full weight of the situation, the colossal, humiliating mistake, sank in. She rose quickly, her boots making soft, sharp taps across the precinct floor, each step a declaration of a monumental shift. As she reached the holding area, Jeffers was still leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a smug smirk still plastered on his face. Riek stood nearby, trying unsuccessfully not to meet Raymond's gaze. Yates didn't speak immediately. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Then she opened the door and stepped inside. Raymond looked up at her, still calm, still composed. "You said you had a meeting in Lansing," she began, her voice carefully controlled. "Yes," Raymond replied, his tone unwavering. "At noon. I was invited to join a justice reform roundtable with the governor." Yates took a deep, steadying breath. "And you are Judge Raymond Carter?" He gave a slight nod. "That's correct." There was a profound, suffocating pause. And then her voice, laced with regret and undeniable gravity, pierced the silence. "Your Honor, I apologize. This should never have happened." Behind her, Jeffers straightened up abruptly, the smugness draining from his face, replaced by a dawning horror. "Wait. What do you mean, Your Honor?" Yates turned slowly towards him, her voice steady but cold, each word a hammer blow of truth. "You arrested a sitting state judge without probable cause. You searched his vehicle without a warrant. And you denied him his right to contact legal counsel." Jeffers' confidence shattered. "He wasn't acting like a judge," he stammered desperately. "He didn't say he." Yates cut him off, her gaze piercing. "He didn't have to. You had his ID. It was your job to verify it. Instead, you escalated without reason." Her eyes then swept to Riek, equally condemning. "You too. You assisted in cuffing a man without proper cause. Do either of you have any idea what this means?" The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Jeffers opened his mouth, but no sound escaped. Riek's face had turned pale, a profound realization dawning in her eyes. Yates turned back to Raymond, her posture and tone completely transformed. "Sir, I'm sorry. Would you like to contact the governor's office now, or have someone drive you there?" Raymond offered a small smile, not smug, just tired, yet utterly triumphant. "Yes, I would, thank you, Sergeant." She nodded, a gesture of profound respect, and walked him out of the holding room. The entire precinct buzzed with a new, stunned energy. Officers glanced up from their desks, confusion on some faces, profound embarrassment on others. The man they had thought was just another quiet arrest now moved through the building with quiet power, his dignity fully restored. And as he exited the building, phone in hand, with Sergeant Yates walking respectfully beside him, everyone left behind understood one thing with chilling clarity. This was far from over. The sun had barely begun its descent, painting the early evening sky in hues of orange and fading blue, when the first tremor of true reckoning hit. A single video, raw and unedited, already had gone viral. It was a mere 27-second clip, captured by a sharp-eyed college student at the rest stop, showing Judge Raymond Carter, a man of quiet dignity, being handcuffed by Officer Jeffers while calmly, devastatingly, asking what he had done wrong. The student's voice, laced with disbelief, could be heard in the background. "This is insane, he didn't do anything." Like wildfire, that video scorched its way across TikTok, then leaped to Twitter, igniting Facebook. The caption, a chilling distillation of the injustice, read, "Man arrested for being black in a suit." Within hours, it had ripped through over 500,000 views. By midnight, it had crossed 2 million. The local news, sensing the seismic shift, picked up the story before dawn, and national outlets quickly followed, their broadcasts punctuated by the damning footage. Screenshots of Raymond's distinguished judicial profile appeared side by side with stark, frozen frames of his arrest. The searing contrast between his composed, dignified appearance and the rough, contemptuous way he was handled sparked a collective outrage that reverberated across the nation. Hashtags like #JudgeCarter, #Justice for Raymond, and #RestStopProfiling began trending across platforms, each one a rallying cry against a system perceived as broken. Civil rights leaders, attorneys, and politicians, their voices laced with righteous anger, began issuing public statements. Some demanded the immediate suspension of the officers involved, while others called for deeper, systemic investigations into the department's deeply entrenched practices. The governor's office, after swiftly confirming Judge Carter's scheduled appearance at their Justice Reform Roundtable, issued a short but piercing statement. "We are reviewing the incident and remain committed to equity and justice across all state agencies." Community organizations, galvanized by the blatant injustice, quickly scheduled press conferences, their resolve hardened. Protesters, their signs bearing poignant slogans like "Judged before justice" and "Dignity in cuffs," gathered outside the Jackson precinct by late morning, their silent presence a powerful accusation. But what truly shook people to their core, what resonated deeper than any headline, wasn't just the fact of the arrest. It was the haunting silence in Judge Carter's face as it happened. He didn't resist. He didn't yell. He simply looked like a man who had seen this kind of thing too many times before. That quiet, profound composure struck a nerve, a raw, exposed truth. He became a symbol, not just of wrongful arrest, but of how deeply the problem of racial bias ran, how insidious it was when even someone at the pinnacle of the justice system couldn't avoid its bitter sting. Inside the precinct, the mood had shifted dramatically, the earlier casual disdain replaced by a palpable tension. Officer Jeffers had been summoned into an emergency review meeting, his bravado utterly gone. Officer Riek remained mostly silent, visibly shaken by the unforeseen storm they had unleashed. Sergeant Yates, now consumed by the crisis, fielded a relentless barrage of calls from internal affairs, the media, and legal counsel. She was now, chillingly, cooperating with the state attorney general's office. No one laughed or smirked anymore. A copy of the viral video had been sent to every computer in the building, and many officers watched it with tight jaws and quiet, dawning shame. Some younger officers, especially those newer to the force, whispered to one another, a flicker of hope mixed with dread in their eyes, wondering if this might finally be the moment something actually changed. For once, the system, in its relentless churn, had turned its spotlight inward, and this time it was not going to look away. The world was watching, and the scales of justice, so recently imbalanced, were about to be reset. The next morning dawned with an unusual quiet at the state capitol. The rotunda, typically a buzzing hive of activity, held a hushed anticipation. Reporters lined the marble hallway outside room 312, where the much-anticipated Justice Reform Roundtable was about to begin. Cameramen adjusted their tripods with meticulous precision, while nervous aides whispered updates into their phones. The governor's staff, members of the state judiciary, and policy experts had already arrived, their faces etched with a mix of gravity and expectation. But all eyes, every single gaze, were fixed on the large oak double doors, waiting for the man whose name had emblazoned every screen for the past 18 hours. Judge Raymond Carter. At precisely 10 a.m., the doors opened. Raymond walked in, utterly composed, profoundly focused. He wore a crisp, dark blue suit, the same slim leather portfolio in his hand, and that same quiet dignity he had carried through the humiliation of his arrest. The room hushed, a collective intake of breath. The noise of politics, the anxious chatter, all faded into something more human, more reverent. Everyone stood, not because protocol demanded it, but because respect, raw and undeniable, compelled them. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, and took his seat at the head of the table. The governor, seated directly across from him, leaned forward, his voice low with earnestness. "Judge Carter, we're honored to have you here." Raymond responded simply, his voice a calm counterpoint to the storm that had raged around him. "Thank you, Governor. I believe the timing speaks for itself." Before the planned discussion on policy could even begin, Raymond made a request to address the room. "Yesterday morning," he began, his voice steady, carrying a gravity that filled every corner of the room, "on my way to this very meeting, I was stopped, detained, and handcuffed by 2 officers of our own state police. There was no warrant, no probable cause, only a baseless suspicion tied, I believe, not to my behavior, but to my appearance. The video speaks for itself." His words, so calm, so devoid of anger, yet so searingly truthful, struck a chord. Across the table, several officials nodded quietly, one younger assemblywoman discreetly wiping away a tear. Raymond continued, his gaze sweeping across the faces before him. "This isn't just about me. I'm not the first person this has happened to, and unless we act, I won't be the last. We speak often of trust between law enforcement and the community, but trust cannot exist without accountability. And dignity, especially the dignity of innocent people, cannot be optional." After his remarks, the entire agenda of the roundtable shifted. What had been planned as a technical discussion about training standards and hiring practices became something far more urgent, profoundly personal. Video clips of the arrest were played again, now in this solemn chamber. Legal experts weighed in, their voices sober. Civil rights leaders, quickly summoned, were ushered into the room, their presence a powerful testament to the moment's significance. Then came the moment no one had anticipated, a decision that cemented the day's historic weight. An emergency hearing was called to begin the immediate review of misconduct charges against officers Jeffers and Riek. And Judge Carter himself, in a breathtaking turn of events, was appointed to oversee the session as a neutral authority. He hesitated at first, his inherent fairness pushing him to avoid any perception of personal bias. But after the governor's legal counsel confirmed that no ethical barrier existed, Raymond accepted. The scales of justice, so recently imbalanced, were about to be reset by the very man who had been so unjustly weighed down. 2 hours later, in the lower chamber, the officers entered the formal review session. The room was packed with media, state staff, and a few community members who had managed to gain access, their faces grim, expectant. Jeffers and Riek, stripped of their usual bravado, looked pale, their shoulders slumped. Jeffers' jaw was set tight, a desperate struggle for composure, while Riek kept her eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding every gaze. Raymond sat at the center of the panel, flanked by 2 other judges and the state attorney. His voice, opening the session, was resonant, unwavering. "We are not here to relive public embarrassment," he stated. We are here to evaluate conduct and determine whether the actions taken violated both legal standards and human decency. The video evidence was reviewed again, meticulously, damningly. Reports from witnesses, timestamps, and crucial body camera footage that starkly contradicted the officers' flimsy written statements were presented. Riek, when pressed, admitted she hadn't reviewed the ID or run the name in their system. Jeffers, attempting to cling to a shred of defense, tried to argue he had simply followed procedure, but his voice shook under cross-questioning, his answers unraveling. When asked why he ignored the request for a phone call, he stumbled through a vague answer about departmental discretion that held no water, no truth. Raymond remained professional throughout, but his tone never softened, never wavered. The profound, quiet authority in his voice made it chillingly clear. The days of casual abuse and unchecked power were ending. Starting now. Starting here. The review session ended just after 5 p.m. The panel of judges, after hours of rigorous evidence review, witness accounts, and legal deliberation, reached a unanimous decision. Officers Jeffers and Riek were found to have acted with negligence, violated protocol, and utterly failed to uphold the basic rights of the individual they had detained. The ruling recommended both officers be suspended without pay, pending a full, thorough investigation by the State Attorney General's office. The official wording was precise, damning. The incident reflected a misuse of authority grounded in personal bias and a dangerous lapse in professional judgment. When Raymond read the final recommendation aloud, the room was utterly silent, the truth hanging heavy in the air. Jeffers didn't say a word, his mouth a tight, grim line. His eyes locked on the table, devoid of defiance, filled only with the bitter taste of consequence. Riek nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if accepting a truth she had already known deep down in her soul. Cameras outside the chamber flashed, capturing every second of their solemn exit. Protesters who had waited all day, their signs now lowered, quietly stepped aside as the officers were escorted out of the building. There was no cheering, no shouting, just a heavy, pregnant silence. The kind that lingers after truth has finally been spoken, after justice, long deferred, has begun to rise. At a press conference held later that evening, the governor stood at the podium, Raymond standing quietly, steadfastly beside him. Today was not about revenge, the governor declared, his voice resonating with conviction. It was about responsibility. Judge Carter, he noted, had demonstrated the restraint and professionalism that every public servant should aspire to, but it should never have been necessary. He then went on to announce powerful new legislation, a mandatory statewide training program focused on de-escalation, racial bias recognition, and the fundamental legal rights of citizens. In addition, the governor proposed forming an independent oversight committee to investigate future complaints against law enforcement across all counties. The press asked Raymond if he wished to comment. He stepped up to the podium briefly, his eyes steady, his voice clear. What happened to me happens to people without a camera watching, without a title behind their name, without someone to speak for them. This isn't just my story. It's a symptom of a deeper wound. But I believe wounds can heal with enough sunlight, truth, and accountability. His words struck a profound chord, resonating far beyond the chamber. Within a week, departments across the state began auditing past arrests. Community town halls were organized. Legal clinics offered free counsel to citizens who believed they had been unlawfully detained. And across social media, the image of Judge Carter standing in the Capitol, not angry, not vengeful, just firm and unyielding, became a powerful symbol of justice done right. As for Jeffers and Riek, their suspension wasn't just a temporary setback. It triggered a profound internal review, a deep dive not only into their immediate actions but into every single case they had been involved in over the last 3 years. Mistakes, long buried under layers of routine and unchecked power, began to surface, patterns that had gone unaddressed for far too long. Meanwhile, Judge Raymond Carter returned to his courtroom, a place where the scales of justice were truly meant to be balanced. He never once brought up the incident from the bench, never showed special favor, never shifted his measured tone. But those who entered his courtroom now did so with a new, quiet awareness. They understood something vital. Justice wasn't just a word carved into the stone above the courthouse door. It was a living standard, one that Raymond Carter was fiercely determined to uphold, even when it meant standing alone against a deeply entrenched system. 3 months later, on a bright spring afternoon, a tangible sense of hope hung in the air. Judge Raymond Carter stood on the wide stone steps outside the Michigan Law Enforcement Training Academy. The trees nearby were beginning to bloom, a gentle breeze stirring through the line of flags overhead. In front of him, a new class of cadets stood in crisp formation. 52 recruits, their eyes forward, shoulders squared, representing a fresh beginning. This was the very first graduating class trained under the newly implemented bias awareness and accountability standards. Each cadet had undergone extensive courses in community engagement, de-escalation strategies, and constitutional rights. The reforms, once seen as controversial and radical, had become a cornerstone of modern training, a fundamental shift in how law enforcement viewed its role. And it all started, profoundly, with one video, one harrowing moment, and one man who chose to stand firm with quiet courage. Raymond had been invited as a guest speaker, an honor he usually turned down, shying away from the public spotlight that had relentlessly followed the incident. But this invitation felt different. It wasn't about cameras or headlines. It was about planting seeds where they truly mattered, in the hearts and minds of those who would now wear the badge. As he stepped up to the podium, the academy director gave him a respectful nod, a gesture of shared purpose. Raymond adjusted the microphone and began in his calm, steady voice, a voice that carried the weight of experience, yet resonated with unwavering hope. 3 months ago, he said, I stood on the other side of a badge. I was treated not as a judge, not even as a man, but as a threat, based solely on a glance and a guess. He paused, letting the profound truth of his words settle over the attentive group. That experience could have made me bitter, but instead it made me more committed, not to punishment but to purpose. He paused again, letting the words sink deep into the solemn atmosphere of the training ground. You're not just here to enforce laws, he continued, his gaze sweeping across the young, eager faces. You're here to protect dignity. That starts with how you see people. Every person, not as a risk, not as a statistic, but as someone's father, sister, neighbor, or friend. The recruits listened closely, their expressions thoughtful, more reflective than formally rigid. A few nodded subtly, absorbing the profound weight of his words, sensing the genuine truth in his voice. Raymond looked out across them and felt something shift, not just in the crisp spring air, but in the very culture of the room, in the unspoken promise of a new way forward. There was a seriousness in their eyes, not fear, not pride, just a humble readiness to serve with integrity. After his speech, the cadets filed out in pairs, heading toward their families waiting just beyond the training field, a quiet excitement bubbling amongst them. A young black recruit paused, then turned back, his eyes earnest. "Thank you, sir," he said simply, reverently. Raymond gave him a small, warm nod. "Go serve with honor." As the crowd thinned and the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in soft golden hues, Raymond remained on the steps for a few more minutes. He wasn't thinking about the past anymore. Not the cold handcuffs, not the hard plastic chair in the precinct. He was thinking about what came next. Change didn't always come with noise, he knew. Sometimes it came slowly, in small, deliberate moments. One decision, one unwavering voice, one classroom filled with eager learners, one quiet step at a time. And in that quiet, hallowed space, Raymond Carter allowed himself to believe. Maybe, just maybe, justice was truly starting to rise on a new kind of foundation, one built not on fear, but on an unwavering commitment to fairness. Raymond Carter walked away from the steps of the academy that day not as a victim, but as a builder of something profoundly better. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. True reform never is. But he also understood that real change begins in the quiet decisions we make when no one's watching. His story is a powerful reminder that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands still, speaks calmly, and waits for the world to catch up. In a country still wrestling with deep divides, Raymond's strength came not from anger, but from a resolute sense of purpose. We all have a role to play, whether in a courtroom, a classroom, or in our everyday choices. Justice, truly, begins with how we treat each other, especially when we think no one will notice.